I had lost all faith that the truth mattered. I understood now that the courtroom is a battleground of storytelling where not necessarily the most truthful, but the most compelling story wins. And the story that took hold was a story of a woman hating woman, which, if you look back in history, is a really sticky story that you see recycled over and over and over again.
We're so happy that you're here. And
You.
I have to say, this book has moved me in a way that a book hasn't moved me in a very long time. And
Wow.
I'm
You're
so
full of books
honored.
around here. How?
I know.
We're
I
jaded.
am. I am. And I'm deeply honored to be in conversation with somebody as wise, open hearted, curious, and generous as you. And this book is
Thanks.
an absolute masterpiece. So I just, where to begin?
Gah, yeah. I don't know.
So, you mentioned at the beginning that if your first book was What Happened, this book is So Now What?
Yeah, so I wrote Waiting to Be Heard at a very different moment of my life. 2013, I just got out of prison. I was still on trial. And I had lived, 4 years of my life in prison watching the world create this crazy narrative about me that I had no say in. And I felt like there was just so much misinformation out there that I just wanted to set the record straight. And I had this like naive idea that if I just told everyone the truth about what had happened, they might believe me. Um, and and I realized that since then, I look back at that book and I'm really proud of it. But it's not really my story. It's the story about a bad thing that happened to me. It was a story about a man who broke into my house and raped and murdered my roommate. It was the story of how a lot of the prosecutor and the detectives in the case just decided to go after the wrong people, and I was just sort of hanging in there. And
And so you wanted to tell that story.
yeah, I had to tell that story. And this story is a very different thing. I basically came away from my encounter with my prosecutor and I thought, oh my God, I have a story. I've actually done something that says something about me that is more than just the story of the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
Right. I'm not defined by the worst thing that ever happened to me. In fact,
Yeah.
I've lived a life.
Yes, I've lived a life. I've processed this trauma. I've encountered people. I have made encounters happen that wouldn't have happened without my effort. And that is who I am. And so that's why I felt deeply compelled to write this book. Also because it's not the story of oh, here's a crazy thing that happened to a little girl in a foreign country, and isn't it crazy? It's a story of these universal truths about confronting the narratives that other people put on us in our lives, and confronting our traumas, and confronting our adversaries, and confronting ourselves, and learning to trust ourselves in the process after we have been victimized and hurt and villainized. And so I felt that one of the things that I'm most proud of about this book is is when people tell me that by reading something that I've written in here, they feel seen. It's not even about me feeling seen anymore. It's about me making that connection with another person and saying, here's a universal truth about living this life. And it is so hard.
Right. So not only are you being witnessed in your full humanity, but through the telling, there's a reciprocity where you're witnessing others in their full
Yeah.
humanity
Yeah.
as well.
And a fun, crazy fact. So prior to this book coming out, I translated the entire thing myself into Italian so that my prosecutor could read it.
But we're going to get to the
We're gonna get to
we're going to get to the
that.
prosecutor
But
relationship
the
because
fun,
it's unbelievable.
yes, but the fun fact about it is he said, "Well, of course, we have different opinions about the things that happened, but he said, I have never felt more seen." And that
Unbelievable.
was very interesting
I
to
mean, I
me.
only wish our world leaders could take a course in truth and reconciliation from you. So powerful is the relationship with you and the prosecutor. But let's get to that,
Yeah,
in time.
yeah.
We're not always in the dire circumstances that you were in, but that realization. Tell me about how a young woman living behind bars came to that realization.
Well, in a weird way, the bars facilitated that kind of realization because I was not under. I, it's interesting. I was never under any false illusions about the fact that I was in prison for a crime that I didn't commit. I think one of the biggest challenges in our lives is we don't realize that we're trapped when we really are. And so we can tell ourselves that we're not trapped even as we're just like running on this treadmill that we don't want to be on and we're unhappy and then we sort of drive ourselves crazy and we're gaslighting ourselves into thinking, "No, I'm not trapped. I'm in control of my life." I very clearly in prison was not in control of my life.
Right.
Like there was no getting around it.
The clarity was so
The
stark that
severe,
yeah.
yes, that I was just like, "Okay, that." And I have claustrophobia, by the way, too, so that just, like I've always had claustrophobia, so, like, being in a jail cell was just, like, I can't open that door. I just like, I would go crazy if I stared at that door, and I was facing this 26-year sentence, and, trigger warning, I was contemplating suicide because ultimately, that is the way out. There is this escape hatch, there is a back door, and then
But
but
much of the story has to do with your love for your mother.
yes. So yes, there are two like big relationship through lines in this book. One is my relationship with my prosecutor, and the other is the relationship with my mother, which I would love to get into because becoming a mother also informed my relationship with my mother a lot and her experience of what I went through. So knowing that there and really like viscerally imagining what that possibility was for me, I could not do that to my mother. I could not. I knew even then that I could not bear to force my mother to accept that the last thing I ever saw was a prison cell. And so I chose to live, and I chose to live every single morning. And if I chose to live, it did not make sense for me to blame other people for the miserableness of my existence because I was choosing to be in it. And
I mean, it's just at 20 something years old for you to take full accountability for your life, not for your circumstances, but for your life is just so powerful. It's so wise. And it just came to you. And it even caused a little conflict with your mother
oh,
because
yes.
because Amanda's mom felt fight, fight, fight. And
This is not your life. You
this
don't
is
deserve
not
to
your
be there.
life.
And at the time, I didn't have the language to describe what I was saying, which was there's there are two ways of looking at your life. You can either you're living your life, but you think you should be living a different life. And it's this idea of the life you should be living, getting what you deserve, being validated in all the ways that you are validated, being seen for who you really are. That's a life that exists only in our minds and it does not really exist. And then there's the life that you actually have. Where some people love you, some people hate you, some people see you, a lot of people don't see you. And you have to then to be an effective agent in your life, you have to accept the reality that is, because that is the clay that you are working with. That is what you are
Right.
building with.
Right. They say the root of all suffering is wanting other than what is.
Yes, and exactly. And I think that the truth about freedom, because God, I've spent my entire adult life thinking about what freedom means.
Right.
It means knowing how to be an effective agent in your actual life, like feeling like you have a choice. And you can only have a choice once you've accepted the materials that you have to work with. And I think for me, that has been like the big shift in my brain, realizing that, like, okay, I don't need all of the things that I deserve in order to make the choices that define who I am and to feel like I am free, that no one's holding me back from being who I really am.
4 years of imprisonment.
Yep.
And even up until the very day that you were released, you were prepared to live your life as you were.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I after I had been convicted, I had lost all faith that the truth mattered. And that I understood that now that like I understood now that the courtroom is a battleground of storytelling where not necessarily the most truthful, but the most compelling story wins. And the story that took hold was a story of a woman hating woman, which, if you look back in history, is a really sticky story that you see recycled over and over and over again. Women pitted against other women, women in sexual competition with each other, and the valorization of the virgin and the demonization of the whore. You see it over and over again, and that was the story that took hold. And I didn't matter, and the truth didn't matter, and so I was not expecting to be acquitted. And then I was. And then I was put back on trial again and I was convicted again and I was facing extradition. So, for those 4 years that I was free, I was both going to school and trying to have a normal life while also having conversations with lawyers about turning myself in to the local authorities in the hopes that they would let me serve out a sentence in the United States instead of abroad. And I was under this, and I think the most horrible part about it was that I felt like there was no place in the world for me anymore. That, like, I couldn't just be Amanda. I was Amanda Knox, the girl accused of murder. And I was not like anybody. I did not belong with the rest of the world. I belonged in the world's spotlight. I belonged I belonged in everyone's judgment, and I was filtered always through the worst possible light. But I did not belong to the rest of humanity. And so I did not plant roots. I did not make friends. I lived in sort of a self-imposed isolation.
Why not change your name?
Well, that's an interesting question. So, one reason was because I stubbornly felt like changing my name was like admitting guilt. And I like there was nothing wrong with me and my name.
Right.
It was everyone else had a problem. I was not the problem. Everyone else had a problem with me. And so I did feel like a part of me was rebellious against that impulse to just try to disappear by changing my identity. But even more so, I recognized that even if I had successfully gone about my life pretending to be someone who this hadn't happened to, that wouldn't change the fact that it was still a part of me.
Right. Well, that's the wisdom in it. Your authenticity wouldn't allow you
Right,
to.
and it would be a barrier
Yeah.
between me and other
Yeah.
people.
Your desire to connect and to be seen was so profound that even the most, like, something that would seem so simple in the short term, just change your last name, was not something you ever considered.
Right, and then when I got married, I did not change my last name because now I'm freaking attached to it.
Even beyond just finding true love through all of this, the way you describe your wedding, I love it so much because it just made me feel like that, you found your community and you got your happy ever after. I mean, life goes on, obviously. But tell me about how you built a community and a life for yourself.
So I met my husband. We have a really nice story. It was not on Tinder, I'll tell you that. And yeah, so I was doing arts correspondence for a local paper under a pseudonym. So I was reading books and or like debut novels, and I was interviewing artists, and I was going to plays and writing reviews. And I happened to get a copy of this debut novel, The War of the Encyclopedists, and I loved it. I wrote a rave review, submitted the review. That was going to be the end of it. Except the very next day, I walk out of my apartment building, and in the diner window across the street was this poster for a book reading at my local bookstore for this exact book that night. And I thought, wow, how serendipitous. I never go out in public, but maybe I can sneak in late and hang out in the back and just sort of like witness this thing that I'm curious about and interested in. And so, of course, I show up a little late, and every seat in the entire place is full except for the one in the front, right there,
Waiting for you.
waiting for me. And so I was like, oh, God. So I had to walk up in front of everybody and sit down. Everyone's whispering, whispering, whispering. I'm just like, shoot me, shoot me. But then the lights go down, the conversation starts, and I bear witness to this like charming conversation between two best friends who wrote a novel together. And they're just the oddest couple. One of them is an army vet. The other one is a complete like Elton John, like a literary Elton John. He has actual stripes carved into his beard. I interview them afterwards, and we just kind of hit it off in a like this intellectual literary way. And, the stripy beard guy reached out his hand and said, "Hey, we should be friends." And this was a few weeks after I'd been completely exonerated in Italy, and I was no longer being hunted down. And I thought, oh my God, is this like how I make friends in the world now? Like, am I allowed to make friends now? And they became my friends. And, when people learned that when his friends learned that he was hanging out with me, all of them would be like, oh my God, what do you think? Did she do it? Blah, blah, blah. Is she weird? And And he was just like, "You're being weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's just a nice person." And he did not Google me. And he did not like, he was not a true crime guy. He's a poetry guy. He got 2 masters in poetry. So he was like, nose deep in Elizabeth Bishop in all the ways that she would not want. And 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 so he didn't really know anything about me, and he just got to know me on my own terms. And it wasn't until after we started dating and people started like sending him pictures of himself with like knives in them, that he was like, okay, so there's some baggage here. I'm gonna learn all about that. And then he went on his own journey of like learning everything about the case and then telling himself, I can just convince everyone and go online and argue with the trolls. And he got that out of his system. And and now he's just like, he's the reason why I'm sitting in front of you all today, because he came into my life at a point when I was hiding. And I truly believed that no one cared about what I thought. No one cared about what I had to say. And I was writing under a pseudonym. Like, I was a curse to my own self. And he was the one who said to me, no, what you have lived and what you think and what you feel is profound. You are so articulate, and it would be a shame for you to not tell your story to the world. So he was the one who convinced me to tell my story. And that's why I'm here today.
So beautiful. So beautiful. So I always believe that life is leaving us little breadcrumbs that are pointing us to our purpose and our people. But, a lot of times we're so busy on the path that we plan for ourselves that we don't see the breadcrumbs. So going to that reading was a breadcrumb that you picked up, and going to Burning Man and
We're going Burning Man. All right, let's do it. Yeah.
telling your slutty story at Burning Man was also a breadcrumb that you picked up. Yeah, tell us about that.
All right, we're going into the OnlyFans section of the book. So yeah, I went to Burning Man with my husband. He said it was background for a novel he was writing, so we could write it off, whatever. And I discovered in Burning Man for the first time that what it felt like to just sort of exist without an identity, because I think one of the cultural things about Burning Man is like you go there and it exists for a week, and you exist. The version of you that is there exists for a week. And that version of you does not live in a world that functions in the way that this world functions. There is no economics to it. There is no exchange. There is only gift. The only way that you ever get anything in Burning Man is by giving. And so one of the gifts to the community, this camp offered a stage for people to get up and do slutty storytelling and to tell the stories of their just like most cringiest, sluttiest moments. And as someone who had been deeply, deeply vilified for my sexuality, and who in prison had sort of come to hate my own sexuality, as like I blamed my sexuality and the fact that I was a desirable object to people as like the fault of what was going on with me, because if you all were there to watch what was going on, like the whole case was deeply pornographic in nature. Like it was absolutely a male fantasy gone crazy. And so I deeply distrusted my sexuality, and at the same time, like I'm a person in a body that is also a sexual body. And so I learned to masturbate in prison. And then I decided to tell the story of learning to masturbate in prison to this group full of like strangers at Burning Man. And I was like, this feels good. So here I am today. It's now immortalized in a book for you all to enjoy.
It just seemed like, first of all, so epic, so crazy epic. But also, it seemed like the genie was out of the bottle after that, because you started to see that your story had power.
And again, like, I think the thing that just so impacts me is when people come to me and say, I see myself in what you are saying, even though I have lived a very different life experience. Like, this is a universal human experience of like finding your own and finding your own in your own body, finding your own in your own place in the world, and taking ownership of the choices that you make.
Right. I mean, just even I remember from being on the TV side of things when you cut your hair off in prison. And at the time, I just thought, "Oh my god, she must be so sad that she's done this."
Yeah, if I could have pulled a Britney Spears and shaved the whole thing off, I would have, but I did not. I only.
But it wasn't an act of despair as much as it was an act of utility, right? I mean,
Yes, yeah. So, okay, here's some fun prison stuff. So hair is like the one thing that at least women in my prison really cared about. Like, people were, becoming very unhealthy in the prison environment, but the one thing that everyone was very vain about was their hair. And they put olive oil in it and soaked it overnight, and like it was very specific. Like, everyone grew their hair out long, and it was just the source of our sense of femininity in that space. And but it was also the first thing that got attacked. So when I was in prison, I witnessed a very violent situation that happened to my one of my cellmates. I was walking out in the yard with her, and I noticed another inmate was walking around kind of going like that with her hands, and I just thought she was, like, having a fidgety sort of moment because she was also someone who was notoriously mentally ill and thought she was God sometimes, and she was actually doing, was rubbing a glue stick into her fingers, so covering her hands in glue, and the next thing I know, she jumps onto the back of my cellmate and starts ripping out her hair. And, so after I was convicted, one of the first things that I did was I just cut all of my hair off. Um, a part as like a rejection of this sense that like there was any value to my vanity, and a part as like a very practical response to a very dangerous and unpredictable environment.
wow. Well, I see you have a tattoo.
Yeah, this is such. So I'm also covered a bit in tattoos. Like, I've got this one we should talk about later when we talk about my prosecutor. But
Okay.
this one is really special, and it's also really sad. So I'm sorry you're about to get a bummer story.
No, we actually like sad stories.
Okay,
Is that
great.
weird?
So sorry, it's my middle finger. So
So it's
take
our
it for
middle
what. Yes.
finger. Okay, go.
It is a semicolon. Anyone familiar with what that means? Okay, yes. So semicolons are a symbol for people who have survived suicide. So the idea is that you think that your life has come to an end, but it's just a pause and life goes on. And I thought that that was a very applicable symbol for my own life because we all experience deaths in our like deaths of ourselves over the course of our lives. And I often think back on like the me that was in Italy, studying abroad and having the time of my life. And I feel like a part of me, that part of me, the girl that never had anything bad happen to her, died in Italy. And so I have my own like personal deaths that I have to take into consideration, and my life continues on. And I happened to get this tattoo because I was interviewing a girl named Daisy Coleman for my one of my very first series that I did called the Scarlet Letter Reports, where I interviewed other women who had been vilified either in the media or in their communities, just generally ostracized, particularly through their sexuality. And this young person was like 14 years old when she was raped by the local football star and left for dead in her frozen to the ground in her front yard, half naked. And she was brought to the hospital for frostbite the next morning and had a rape kit done and all of that. But everyone in the town said that she was a slut and blah, blah, blah. And so no one believed her, and she tried to commit suicide. And she had, by the time that I had reached her, she was better. Like, she had become a tattoo artist. She had this foundation that she was working for called Safe Bay. So helping women who were dealing with suicidal ideation to like find a community of people who could support them. And so I asked her to tattoo this onto me. and at the time that I interviewed her, and she did. And the saddest part of the story is that many years later, um, her younger brother tragically died in a car accident. And then shortly thereafter, her mom committed suicide. And then shortly after that, she committed suicide.
Mm.
So this is my remembrance of Daisy Coleman and the very difficult life that she lived.
Well, now she lives in all of us as well. So thank you for telling us that story.
And like, can I just like linger on that just a moment?
Please.
Because it'll bring me back to the mom of it all.
Yeah.
Um, I think that Daisy survived as long as her mom survived. And then once her mom could no longer survive, she couldn't either.
Or she felt like she didn't need to anymore. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I asked Peter Neufeld, one of the founders of the Innocence Project, the first ever Innocence Project in New York, about this. I was like, what is it that like makes or breaks a person after they get out of prison? Because some people have been in prison for 4 years like me. Some people have been in prison for 40. And you see like different people reacting to freedom in different ways. Some people commit suicide afterwards. Some of them go on to have like very fulfilled lives. And I was like, is there a rhyme or reason that you can tell? And he was like, well, I mean, this is anecdotal. I'm a scientist, so I can't like say that this is the scientific truth. But anecdotally, what I see is that the major thing that defines whether or not a wrongly convicted person will succeed in life after their conviction is if their mom supported them throughout their wrongful conviction and if she was still alive by the time they got out, even just for a year after they got out. Like knowing that their mom got to see them get out made every difference. And so, for me, my mom, like many of these people who are wrongly convicted, was my biggest crusader. And from a young age, like she had always supported me in all of my quirks and eccentricities and all my interests. I played soccer, I played softball, I did gymnastics, I was in choir, I was in all of the school plays. I was doing everything, and she was there for it. And she always supported me. And my decision to go study abroad, she was all for it and helping me convince my dad. And 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 then we go through this experience, and my mom has to go and visit me in prison every week for an hour and then leave me there every single time. And I didn't fully understand the depth of what that meant for her until the second I gave birth to my daughter.
Right.
And she was screaming in pain from having been birthed, as you do. And I was stricken with this realization that she was in pain and I could not take that pain away from her. And the first words that I said to her was, "I'm sorry." And my mom, who's in the room with me, I look over at her and I'm thinking, this feeling that I'm feeling right now is what my mom felt that entire time. And then a few years later, not even a few, like a year and a half later, I'm like, Mom, I'm going back to Italy. And I'm going back to Italy to sit down with my prosecutor. And it was the first time that my mom wanted to tell me no. The first time in her whole life when she was like, this is wrong.
She begged you not
She
to go.
begged me not to go.
She begged you not to go, but it was a breadcrumb for you, and you were following it. And I love you mentioned some advisor or life coach who I guess came and visited you and your husband.
It was so random. So like I gave it, yeah.
Random or
Or
as I always say, everything happens in DST, Divine Standard Time. He showed up in DST literally.
Yeah, like it was a conversation that needed to be had because like, okay, so the way this came down was in 2019, I was plagued by this not knowing why this had happened to me, not understanding how this man could look at a 20-year-old girl with no history of violence and no criminal behavior, like nothing, and say, this is a sex monster. Like, where did that come from? How was that possible? Why didn't he admit that he was wrong when the evidence became clear that the actual murderer was this other guy who, by the way, has since gone on since he got out of prison to sexually assault another young woman, isn't on trial for that now. So, like, with a history of violence, like all of that, how did he pursue this case? Why? Why? And I can sit here speculating about it infinitely and receive no response, or I can just ask him.
Right.
And I knew that it was going to be a very tricky conversation. I had in my mind this idea that if I could just sit in front of him outside of this like adversarial justice system, he would see that I'm not the person that he thought he was prosecuting. But then the pandemic happened and no one was going anywhere. And all of us had a lot of time on our hands. And I don't know what you guys were doing, but I was writing letters to my prosecutor
In Italian.
in Italian. Because after 4 years, ci mancherebbe se non posso parlare italiano. So I asked myself, how do I have a conversation with this person? Because who is primed to be adversarial towards me?
And who your mother believed it wasn't her fear. She believed she was almost being psychic about this. He can set a trap for you.
Oh, yeah.
And we could be back in this nightmare all over again with fake trumped up charges.
Absolutely. Yeah. They didn't. Yeah. One of the funniest exchanges that I had, I was asking my family about how they felt about me going back to Italy. And my uncle was like, just don't do anything, to get in trouble. And I was like, I didn't do anything to get into trouble the first time. Thanks, Uncle Mickey.
Exactly. But I love the moment with this teacher. You kind of finally say to him, well, what do I have to gain? And he says, you have something to give.
Yeah. It was that switch. So my husband this entire time was sort of asking me, well, so after 2 years of correspondence, the pandemic's over. I buy a plane ticket. I know I'm going. And suddenly I'm like, oh my God, why am I going? What am I doing? And my husband asked me, we wake up every day and it was almost like, how some people are like, boo, when they go around corners. He would do that with me where I'd walk around a corner and be like, why are we doing this? And then I would, I would be like, and I had to give an answer. So I would it would always change. And so I was like, and I would say things like, I want him to know that I'm not the person he thought I was, or I want him to admit he was wrong, or I want to know if he cares that he hurt me. Like all of these things were coming up. And then I told my story to a group of people. At that point, I was doing public speaking. And this person came up to me and I thought he was like some sort of career coach or something. And he was like, I want to come to your house before you go to Italy. And I said, okay. So he
She's
did.
like, sure.
Yeah. I was like, sure. Yeah, I don't know how to do my taxes. You can help me out with that. Like, I don't know. But he sat me down and he was like, look, there's you, there's your well-being. And then you have decided that your prosecutor's right there in the middle and that you have to go through him to be okay. But that's not true. There's you and there's your well-being. And then your prosecutor's like over here. So you can there's nothing between you and your well-being. You can be okay today. The question that you should be asking yourself, though, is why do you keep wanting to go down there? Why do you keep wanting to go to your prosecutor? And I was like, I guess if I'm not going there to be okay, like, what is it? And he was like, well, it sounds to me like you don't want to get something. You have something you need to give him. And so I was like, okay, what do I have to give him? And so I show up in Italy and I think this is a really important thing that I want to say because I think there's some misunderstandings about what it means to accept your life and to build bridges. That does not mean that you tolerate injustice.
Correct.
It does not mean that you do not set boundaries. That is not required in order for you to make a connection with a human being. Like, this is a person who hurt me. And so I came to that table standing up for the truth. And I told him, I am innocent and you harmed me. And you didn't just harm me, you harmed lots of people. But here's also another true fact. You are more than the worst thing you've ever done. And I believe that even when you were doing this to me, you thought you were doing the right thing. I truly believe that. And because of that, I cannot, I do not, and I cannot hate you. And if anything, here I am living this life that in a big way you gave to me. And I am so grateful for it. This life that I have is so precious and meaningful and purposeful because of you. And so, in a weird way, I kind of love you for that. And then what do you say to that?
Well,
Like,
well, in a way, you've changed his life in many ways, but your adult version has you've become his teacher. You're sort of his spiritual advisor in a way.
yeah, I mean, he definitely felt like he is a very spiritual person, very Catholic, very spiritual, very much thinking about his relationship with God on a daily basis. And he said that coming out of that experience, he felt like he had experienced grace, which isn't to say that he said all the things that you would want somebody like him to say. In fact, when I recounted to my mom everything that happened afterwards, she was so pissed.
Right.
She thought it was a complete waste of time, too little, too late. Am I allowed to swear?
Fuck
That guy, you know,
yeah.
like that. I don't know. It's a nice bookstore.
I love cursing in nice places.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of scandalous, yeah. But like but then I turned it around on my mom and I was like, "Mom, it's not about him. Like my entire adult life has been about him and his choices and their impact on my life, and this is the one time where it was not about him, it was about me and how I could show up and how I could build that bridge and how I could be kind because I truly have it in me. And that is who I am."
100%.
And so that
100%. So beautiful. So beautiful. And in sort of letting him off the hook, you freed yourself.
I mean, I didn't let him off the hook though.
No,
No, but like
you held him accountable, but you gave him grace.
yes.
And in
yeah.
doing that, you unhooked yourself from him.
Yes. And then I discovered that the power dynamic that I thought we had where like my well-being depended on him was completely the opposite.
Literally the opposite. I mean, for every one letter you send him, he writes you 5 or 6.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, he texts me every day. I'm not kidding. So but because, you know, my relationship with him, he tells me this has been one of the most meaningful relationships that has ever happened to him. And it came out of nowhere for him. Like he was not prepared. Like I had done all of this mental preparing for that moment. And, you know, to his credit, he showed up. Like he didn't not show up because he was physically there and he didn't have to. You know, I did not set out to forgive my prosecutor. That was not my goal. My goal was to understand my prosecutor. But what I have found is that an inevitable consequence of really understanding someone, of like recognizing their humanity, is empathy, compassion, and forgiveness. And so forgiveness kind of snuck up on me.
Ooh. God bless you. God bless you. It's just this conversation has just been so beautiful and my heart's just so full and open for you. I can't wait to
you.
see what you do next. I
I'm
really
excited.
can't.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I've been doing stand-up.
no way.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my God. Well, we have to have her back for
yeah.
stand up. Okay.
It's good.
Thank you
It's a little
so
dirty.
much.